Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Horticulture. And if you can't tell by now, I'm not Alexis. It's another one of our special little bonus episodes that we record around the holidays when it's hard for us to all to get together. And I'm actually joined today. I was thinking about how I could talk about my little corner of the horticultural universe, which, aside from my work stuff, is a little 1/4-acre lot with a house and a few trees and some plants that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And I think that for a lot of our listeners, or if you're not a farmer, or if you're not yet on a larger parcel of land, it could be that your little corner of the horticultural world is a porch with a couple of plants on it, or it could be that you have a small vegetable garden or a raised bed, or maybe a large garden or something like that. And so I was just reflecting a little bit on how my little corner of the horticultural world has changed across time. But it would be disingenuous and dishonest if I were to act like that's just my story to tell. And so I have actually invited a special guest. She is a award-winning, renowned anthropologist, Dr. Annie Kemple, joining us today, but not in that capacity, but to talk a little bit about gardening. Hey, Annie, welcome to the Horticulture Podcast.
Hello, happy to be here.
How happy would you say that you are to be here?
As an official listener of about 3.5 episodes, I'm extremely happy to be here.
You can tell it's a very supportive environment over here. So if I didn't make it clear, Annie and I are married. We have been married, and we've had this little house on a parcel of land in Lexington, Kentucky, for just over 10 years now. So, can you briefly tell us a little bit about your interest in plants and horticulture, how that's maybe grown over time, where that came from, any initial thoughts you have, and then I think maybe we can talk a little bit about the progression, the stages of development or evolution of our gardening ethos after that.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question to start us out with. I
like to make things unmanageable from the jump. So.
No. Also, for the record, the reason I've only listened to 3.5 episodes is because I get the constant podcast at home every day of this lovely man talking about these things.
Lucky or cursed, you decide.
To your question, I have loved plants for a long time. I don't know. It's one of those, I can't really pinpoint the exact time when I was a kid or teenager when I was like, hey, these things are really cool. You know, we had a small tomato garden when I was a kid. But I think when we bought this house, it was the first time that I had the realization of like, oh, planting things is something we can do. We can just do this. It's almost like going to college and realizing you're an adult and you're the one who has to go to the store and buy the ice cream. Like, oh, I can do this. And so I think we started relatively small, kind of bracketing out little patches one at a time and transforming our small yard. But I really think it was moving here and having the space and I guess mostly the space and the support to be able to plant things.
Yeah, so if we jump back 10 years it was 2024, fall of 2024, we moved in here.
2014,
sorry. Yeah, it is 2025 now. It was 2024 recently. It was 2014 a while ago. Thank you. Yes. So in the while ago one, the 2014 period, we moved in, and we initially, I think we kind of, and since then too, I kind of think about our space as there's a front yard, there's a backyard, and then there's that stretch along the side of the house. There's kind of like those three main areas. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
And so we, and all of that when we moved in was in sod, and we then discovered it was there was an abundance of stones. I don't want to call them rocks. I'd call them stones. About 1 foot by 1 foot, give or take a little bit, of limestone that had been brought in, and for some reason stacked in a circle, like 2 or 3 stones deep into the ground. So like I took the top layer off, and then there'll be some pictures on our Instagram page showing some of the progression of this over time.
Also, massive euonymus bushes that we are still
one.
Oh God! Well, it's spread. We're still kind of pulling it up.
Singular but mighty.
Yes.
Yeah, and so there was basically a couple of bigger decent sized trees, a couple of beautiful dogwoods, Bradford pear in the front yard, and a large euonymus, and then a bunch of grass. That was kind of the slate we started with. And so, what's your memory of that first push? You talked about bracketing, so I think we've talked about this on previous episodes where maybe you take and you figure out, one section that's 3 by 6 or 4 by 8 or something like that, and you put stuff in it, and for 1 year you take care of that. And then the next year, maybe you expand it, you see how that went, you add a little bit more. For us, I think it was kind of building like from the house out. So it's like adding little peninsulas onto our continent of other stuff. But what's your initial or your early memories of that shift from the kind of grass and euonymus and blank slate to something less blank?
I think I remember really just how small we started, especially in the front yard, just with some flowers and just trying to get anything to grow out there with like weird shading and maybe not the best soil, so having to amend it a little bit. But then in the backyard, I remember, when did we start the vegetable garden out there? Was that 2015? Was that our first year?
It would have been spring, I think spring of 2015 probably.
Okay, so pretty quickly expanded in the backyard to planting rows of vegetables.
Yeah, so at that time, I had just come from working at the UK South Farm, where I had larger fields of vegetables that I managed, and so that was my reference point. And so I think we created, you're saying, rows of vegetables, but it was kind of like a little mini horticulture enterprise that we had back there with drip tape and longer, 40, 50 foot long rows and all that kind of stuff.
Yes. And I don't know why I feel the need to explain why we did this, but I've been vegetarian since like maybe 2008. And I like eating well-prepared vegetables. And so having a vegetable-heavy diet, but at the time not really being able to afford a CSA, $600 all at once is kind of a lot when you're not making much money.
And those are 2013 numbers as far as 600.
Yeah. So kind of thinking about that when we were planning the backyard of like, what are the vegetables that we would like to have not only now, but we would like to can for over the winter, and what are ways that we can supplement our diet and, pay for it with our labor rather than the little bit of money we had coming in. And then, I'm getting ahead of myself, but slowly transitioning out of that into what we have now, but thinking or reflecting on that time, how much it taught me about, I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't really grow up knowing anyone who worked in horticulture. I did not even really realize that was something people went into. But it taught me a lot about weed management and pest pressures and fungal pressures and all of those things that, as someone who studies and obviously eats food, you don't really think about unless you experience it or hear someone talk about it. And so it taught me a lot about, even though it was very small, all things considered, it taught me a lot about food production and how challenging it is.
Yeah, in academic circles, you might say we eat with the literature review first, right? And then the eyes, and then other.
I hate that.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay. Well, the honesty, the therapy for honesty has been working out. Marriage counseling for therapy for honesty has been helping in the new year. So much for resolutions. No, so I think it's interesting. So if you're one thing I'll just mention before we move on to some of the transitions is when we were lucky and fortunate and privileged and all the other things to be able to get into the housing market and co-own a house with one of the major banks through a mortgage before all of the explosion. We said 2014, and housing prices have skyrocketed and seems bad. Access to housing and access to that home ownership thing that so many American dreams are built around is just, I'm not going to go fully down that rabbit hole, but on the off chance that there are folks who are thinking about getting into the housing market or thinking about finding a new place to live and you're interested in doing some horticultural stuff, a very small side note I'll mention is when we did this, one of the things that I would do, and our realtor, who was very nice but found me a little strange, I think, was I'd get my iPhone and there's a compass in your iPhone, and I would get that out and I would orient myself to which way was south facing, west facing, east facing. Some people will do that because they're thinking about putting in a porch and they don't want to be cooked in the afternoon sun, or they, want a really nice morning sun on whatever. In my case, it was because we wanted to have a space to grow stuff. And so our area of town has a lot of trees. With that, this lot happens to have a pretty good wide open south-facing window to be able to get a lot of sunlight in. In the northern hemisphere, we get a lot of sun from the south, and so even back to when we were looking at houses and evaluating where we wanted to live, we knew we wanted to grow plants somehow, and so that was important because if we were in a really shady location, we would have had to do something different. Maybe cut trees down, pivoted somehow, but that's just something I'll mention. As you're looking at houses, that site selection does matter if you're wanting to have a garden. And for us, it's that outdoor space has been so important. And I think over time, to allude to what you were talking about a little bit, as life moves on, as we have jobs that are different, as we get a little bit older ourselves, as maybe we have a little more money on hand, there's an opportunity for us to think differently about how we're going to handle that space or how we're going to use that space. And so when would you say that was? That we made a transition. So we know, spoiler alert, we no longer have our whole backyard in vegetables like we at one point did. And now we have it, in a variety of perennials we'll talk about here in a second. Was that transition in 2020?
Was it post-COVID?
2019. No, I don't think it was post-COVID. I think it was maybe like 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. We started to lose our enthusiasm, I think, for the large garden.
Yeah, I get tore up by mosquitoes, and so the idea of weeding and, taking care of existing outside, after work, being tired and having to do all of that, it was just becoming more of a burden than it was a source of joy, I think.
Yeah, because, you could say we could have just toned it back to a small raised bed, and that would have been fine. Because at that time, I think we had like 8 or 10 40 to 50 foot long rows with a variety of mixed vegetables.
Yeah.
Which is kind of intense,
Yeah. Especially that's not our full-time job. We don't, yeah.
Yeah, and we both had full-time jobs.
Yeah. And I think, I will say one holdover, I think, is we still grow a good number of herbs and plants that we can use in cooking or in making tea, but aren't really the, main ingredient.
Yeah. Well, so, we can launch next into what the new iteration of the next iterations of the yard looked like. But before we do, I want to say, for you, was there any kind of struggle with cutting out the vegetable growing? For me there was, but was there for you?
Yeah, I think there's. Well, first of all, I'm not Alexis or Ray or
Jessica.
Jessica. Ooh, sorry, Jessica.
You didn't call her Josh, so that's a plus.
Yes, that I would really apologize. I think that, so I cannot walk you through a deep horticultural explanation of how exactly seeds work and develop into plants, but there's something deeply human about the mystery of not being able to see what is going on below the surface. You know, you take this little tiny thing you see from a plant and you hold on to it, and a few months later you throw it into the soil, and a little bit later some green sprouts up, and then a little bit later that becomes food you can eat. There's just something so deeply human to me about that. And so I think there's something there on a deeper level that I still do miss about growing vegetables. But I think you know, on a more immediate level, I, especially now because we're in a different financial position, I really enjoy being able to support someone who's trying to make their livelihood out of this or does still get joy from growing fruits and vegetables. I'm really happy that that can continue elsewhere. And
yeah. Well, I think we both have a little bit of a tendency or a likelihood to critique a notion that the solution to all food problems is for people to grow their own food. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yeah. We won't go into that too deeply now. Maybe in the future episode we could talk more about that. But I think that for me, the struggle was a little bit more on like a sense of identity loss and probably ego. Where we would have, like, we still have people who think, because they met us at some point in that 3 or 4 year period, they still think, oh, you all grow like all your own vegetables and like that, this is like who you are. And then, and sometimes people saying like, it almost makes them feel bad about themselves that they don't do more of that or whatever. And all of that, like there is if this is about the culture of horticulture, there is a lot of like Instagram toxicity around local food,
yes,
around gardening, around
yes,
growing stuff. And I target Instagram, but it certainly exists on the blog, on the blogosphere, and on
the vlogosphere, regular
media, the vlogosphere, other sphere, stratosphere, mesosphere. But I am so opposed to that. Like it offends me so deeply that you would take something like that and use it to like promote your personal brand or construct some sort of identity that puts you above others or something like that. And I think that probably relates to the humanness of it. Like the idea that gardening or doing, engaging in plant stuff is a way to show off would make people 50 plus years ago laugh.
Yeah.
Like it was just something that you did, or like you did it because you were too poor to buy the stuff, or So anyway, I'm getting on a little bit of a soapbox there, but I think there was a transitional period where I was like, well, who am I if we're not the people who grow a bunch of vegetables in their backyard? Or like I'm not meeting expectations of what people think, how people think I am, or if I don't do that, then what am I doing? And granted, I have plenty of other things that I do, so it wasn't like a long-term struggle of mine, but it's just, I think, something that I would say to people who are listening and are maybe in a similar boat or something, or they're feeling some kind of pressure to do something for a performativity or for a identity projection, that like this is supposed to be fun. Like this is supposed to be joyful. This is supposed to be something that fills you up, not something that you feel like you have to do. And like I social media is a double-edged sword. There's really good things and really bad things about it, but I found myself like wanting to post things on social media, like do them so I could post them on social media or something like that. And that to me that's a sign that maybe we wanted to reorient. And so we did reorient. Mm-hmm.
And there's also, I'm just going to, this may be a side note tangent, but there was a conception of, oh, those are the people who grow all of their own food or all of their own vegetables. And even when we had the 8 to 10 rows of 50-foot vegetable, like we were still having to supplement, with grains and proteins and stuff. But also, like we couldn't grow every vegetable we wanted to eat. Sometimes I want to make eggplant parmesan, and we didn't grow eggplant.
Yeah, flea beetles. I'm not about that life. You could pay me to deal with flea beetles on eggplant, common thing, and
Gotcha.
it's just the whole thing. Plus, they make me itchy.
Ooh,
The plants,
yeah.
the plants make me itchy.
Yeah. Or like realizing that Brussels sprouts are one of my favorite vegetables and I love eating them, but man, growing them, am I allowed to curse?
Sure.
Growing them is kind of a bitch.
Oh,
And so just, not wanting to grow that. And so
yeah,
there's,
because if you're not familiar, Brussels sprouts take a really long time, and you're ultimately going to be eating like a somewhat leafy portion of the plant. So in other words, the buffet is open to the things that like them all year, 140 days or however many days it is supposed to be, to most Brussels sprouts. Anyway,
And they
that's
get
just a
so
little
big.
horticulture nugget for the horticulture people.
yeah, they take up so much space. But
Broccoli takes
and so-
a lot of space.
there's also a lot of mythologizing that goes on around people who grow any amount of fruits and vegetables. And I think that's something that along the lines of what you were saying with, not wanting this to be your identity or kind of pushing back against that. I think just the mythologization that goes along with growing your own fruits and vegetables, I think can sometimes be counter to actual efforts to transform our food system, because it's an individual focus when I think there needs to be more of a focus on community.
Yeah,
But
and
again, that's another side
The
note.
doing the thing is a triumph of the individual. The failing to do the thing is a failing of the individual, and that's sort of all that's discussed, or the only way it's thought about. As opposed to, why isn't it easier for people to participate in a more just food system? Why don't we consider food to be a human right in the United States or wherever you're? Maybe you do in the place that you're listening. Anyway, told you we were bringing an anthropologist on. As if I need much encouragement in that direction. But yeah, so we made this kind of hard transition, I think, and there was that whole global pandemic in the middle. But how would you characterize? And I think we're a little bit overselling just how much, like, we, even while we had the vegetables, we had multiple areas of our yard that were in I guess ornamentals, mostly like native plants, but a variety of other just flowers, basically flowers and some shrubs and all this kind of stuff. This all predates my interest in bonsai. And in the front yard, we had some bulbs and some stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I think let's just say 2020 was kind of the breaking point of when the before and the after. But in 2020, I think we made this transition where we started to change what the backyard looked like, and we really expanded in the front yard. Mm-hmm. And this is why I didn't want to do this by myself. You were the main driver of a lot of that. While I was struggling, either working a lot or struggling with pandemic stuff or whatever, and you obviously were working full time too, but you found some time and energy to go out and do the Annie style wildflower seeding.
You just grab a handful of seeds and throw them somewhere.
Yes.
You stamp them into the soil.
You've
and
heard of Johnny Appleseed. This is Annie wildflower seed.
just pounds and pounds of wildflower seed. I think you talking about that reminded me, during 2020, I was doing interviews for my schoolwork, and I remember
PhD dissertation.
Okay,
Award winning.
No, okay.
Award winning dissertation.
Okay.
I'm just proud.
Okay, thank you. I was interviewing people about growing food, eating food, experiencing food in Eastern Kentucky. And I remember talking to one woman who, was going on and on about how she loves gardening. That's her therapy. When she has a bad day at work, she can't wait to get home and just get into her garden, and how her entire yard has been transformed into a garden. And I asked her, "Oh, are those vegetables?" And she said, "No, I don't plant vegetables. They're all flowers." And for some reason, the passion she had around that was what made me be like, "Oh, I can plant flowers. We don't have to do all vegetables. This can just be a beautiful thing for us to experience, and for neighbors to experience, and people who come over." And so she really changed something inside of me. But I think I remember really reflecting on her story and what she told me, and thinking about that's really doable, and that's beautiful.
So what have you done? No. What did you do to our like in that initial period, I would say the strength of Annie is endurance, persistence,
Patience.
not patience, and like of the vibe. And my strength is like planning out, like logistical planning of that type of thing, and spreadsheets and sketches, and thinking about, would you agree with that? Is that a fair
Yes,
characterization?
which is why I think we have a bunch of very nicely planted bulbs in the front yard. We have tulips and daffodils and crocus.
And along the side of the house now too.
And along the side of the house. And those all come up beautifully in the spring in very pre-planned, thought-through ways. And then we have wild patches of wildflowers coming up the rest of the year
Both of which are a huge vibe.
From when I have gone out and just thrown seed around.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's parts. So the area where we have wildflowers that were initially there, kind of while the vegetable garden was still there, that's pretty wild. But then as we transitioned the vegetable garden into something more ornamental, we did a little bit more structured planning.
Yes.
And planting transplants instead of seeds. Can you talk a little bit about that, like the mix of transplants and like seedling kind of things and trees and seeds, and like kind of how your understanding of that has grown? Because there's a lot of folks who listen to this, I think, who might be in a similar boat that you were in 2015, 2016.
I think I don't know if this is directly answering your question, but I think the most maybe transformative thing I have learned along those lines is that you can start your own annuals. So starting like, I don't know, petunias or something like that from seed is something that you can just do. You don't have to go pay $20 for a petunia plant. Although they have some really cool varieties that, you may not be able to. So I take that back a little bit. But I think there is also a value.
Well, if you're on a budget and you're trying to maximize your impact, you can get a $3, a couple of $3 things of seed and some trays and some stuff and some media, planting media, garden media for maybe $20-$30 total. $20-$30 doesn't go too far in the buying annual bedding plants. So that's a great shout. What about the other, like putting a plant where you want it to go versus...
Yeah. And knowing that knowing that you have a transplant that is a couple inches tall, and if I put it in the ground, it'll come up where I put it in the ground, not just a wild scrabble of things. Also with sunflower seeds in particular, I probably put out, not exaggerating, 300 to 500 sunflower seeds every year. And I don't get a single sunflower because they're dug up by chipmunks, or when they sprout, they're eaten by something else.
I think we got a system now.
Yes.
As of 2024.
Yes.
Late 2024.
Yes.
We have a system, and if it works in 2025, we'll be sure to share it on the podcast. But that's definitely an issue. Direct seeding is, it's cheaper because it's $5 for some seed. You throw it out, and it could be 100 plants, or it could be 0.
Yes.
So how would you describe, either through what a couple of the plants we have in the mix out there, or just the overall aesthetic, how would you describe what our spot looks like now?
I mean, other people have described it as like a home arboretum. That feels a little grandiose.
I've heard people say that it feels kind of like a park.
I like that.
Well, arboretum maybe is a little like, but it's like if you've ever been to the Lexington, Central Kentucky Arboretum near campus, there's a couple of sections with lower growing stuff that don't, not the big trees and all that. And it does have a little bit of that feel. We put in a paver patio in 2022.
I think so. I think one of my favorite things about it is we have walking paths kind of up, like from the patio up to the right of the yard, that swings back around to the front and then through the middle and back down the left side. And so it's just a really nice place surrounded with flowers where I can take a phone call or call someone and just kind of meditatively walk along those paths.
Circles,
and it's
I'd say, linearly there's probably 250 feet of paths back there. And that's an example where I think if it had been just me, if it had been just you, we might not have had paths at all.
Correct.
If it had been me, it might have been just overly landscaped and not really like wild enough, and not some of the cool vegetation and flowers and other stuff, unexpected stuff that we have back there. And so I think that, again, this was why I didn't want to just talk about it myself. We also, I think, a couple of other things I would note that we've added that I think really add. We have a couple of different, they're I guess you could call them hardscaped / structural elements. So we have several arches of different sizes. That was something that you specifically requested. You're a big arch guy?
Love an arch.
Any reason for that, or just...
Some of it is functional. I mean, I don't know. I like the way they look, but I also like the function of it. We have some, what are they called?
Compass plants?
Compass plants that are on either side of a path, and they have a tendency to fall over in late summer. And so having an arch to kind of hold them up makes the path usable and makes them look prettier. Mm-hmm. And then I like the idea of growing vines over arches, and that provides the structure for some more vining plants.
I think it also, one of the things about that space now, you know, in the past with the mini horticulture farm, it was a functional space, and it looked like a functional space.
Yes.
Like, it was not overly pleasing to the eye, except the fact that you maybe enjoy the order of straight lines. Now it's more like another large room in the house, kind of, in the sense of like spending time out there. Granted, the mosquitoes still exist, but we've been using some like thermocells and stuff like that to just, you know, mitigate that a little bit. But the arches have a way of introducing an architectural element into the overall space that acts in the same way that a door or a window does to, you know, frame the outdoor area into a house or something like that. It just makes it more, architectural. It reinforces those paths as like an element within your overall experience of the space. Like, it's kind of landscape architecture vibes. Another thing that we've done is we've brought in quite a bit of rock. Mm-hmm. Just one little trucklet load at a time, mostly.
I think two things I would not have done if it weren't for you was using rocks as landscape features and using raised beds. You really encourage, you know, the thoughtful use of raised beds in different places, and that's something I don't know, I was a little resistant to, maybe because I didn't fully understand what they were really, how they were helpful or beneficial or functional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of spots out there where for both visual and functional reasons, I was trying to get things raised up a little bit. We've talked about that on the podcast before, the value of raised beds for drainage and for keeping roots happy and all that kind of fun stuff. The rocks is a big, that's something that I drew very heavily from Japanese garden design. Our garden is very much not a Japanese garden. It is cottagecore maximalist fused with Japanese garden. Like, there's elements of it. In winter, it kind of looks like a Japanese garden. In the season, it looks like, holy moly, this is like a butterfly and bees most exciting place to be in the world, which is, both of those are really, really awesome. But rocks have a big role in Japanese gardens as this way of, you know, they look cool, but I think in a lot of Japanese gardens, they are a symbolic reference to the mountains, which play such a huge role in the landscape of Japan, obviously. And if that's not obvious to you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound condescending. But one little thing that I tried to do in the layout of our garden is to just a little bit give east to west Kentucky feel, in the sense that there's kind of this the far east, so to speak. It's actually not oriented east-west, but I guess it kind of is. Yeah, it kind of is. The eastern edge has kind of like more forested, it's darker, it's damper, and then there's a mountain range, so to speak, that's contoured, and it also has some stones, and then there's a more of like a central area, and then the western's a little bit flatter and kind of tapers out to our neighbor's yard. So within reason, I was trying to mimic the topography of Kentucky, or at least use that as a reference point. All the things you can do inside when you have cabin fever and are thinking about changing things up. But so I think, and we've also added in the bonsai stuff.
Yeah.
And that's pretty heavily impacted the space. A couple of benches. I mean, not as much as you would think. It's not like it's taken over the whole space, but there's definitely that as a whole element too. I'm trying to think if is there anything, some of the species we have out there, as far as trees in the ground, we have a Japanese red pine. We have a Japanese umbrella pine, which is not a pine. I think it's Cyadopidus is the genus. I think both of those are kind of dwarf cultivars. We have a juniper, a blue Chinese juniper that's, again, kind of a dwarf, 20-foot tall cultivar. A couple of Japanese black pines that I'm going to try to keep small. Let me see what else. A variety of other junipers in the ground. And then as far as, the flowers go, a lot. But what are some of your favorites or some of the highlights for you?
Some of my favorites. Goldenrod, which we never planted. I don't know where it came from. Just kind of blew in and took root, and it's beautiful. I think we have 2 or 3 different varieties of goldenrod that just showed up. I like zinnias and sunflowers. The zinnias also have started just kind of popping up every year, which is fun. What else? Coneflower. What are the vining plants that we put in this past year? I'm completely drawing a blank.
There's a trumpet vine.
Yes.
Which is a native. And there is a clematis.
Yes.
A couple of clematis that are the kind of... We have one that's a cool purple flowered cultivar, and then we have another one that I think it's a white native cultivar.
I do like a mix of native and non-native.
Yeah, we're
plants.
not native purists.
I'm not a purist. Yeah, I also get a lot of joy from the herbs and stuff that we grow. So chamomile and lemon balm and orange balm, which I found for the first time last year.
You just grow those. What do you do with those herbs? Do you even do anything with them?
I really like cooking with fresh herbs in the summer. So just being able to go outside and grab a handful of basil and rosemary and thyme and oregano and just throw it into a tomato sauce. It's so good. But also drying some of them to use it in the winter. Drying lavender and chamomile and lemon balm and marjoram, all for tea. Marjoram makes an incredible tea. If you have not tried it, I highly recommend it. Just chamomile and marjoram together, steep for 5 to 10 minutes. So good. But yeah, I get a lot of joy out of being able to grow herbs and use them throughout the year and try different ones and see what works and what doesn't in different places. Different basils. Our basil has started coming up every year. Just let it go to seed and it's just planted itself.
Self-seeding.
Oh, yeah. Trying to think of what other flowers or herbs we have out there. Blue star.
Yeah.
It's another flower. We have a bunch of different types of butterfly weed. Am I saying it was butter? I always get butterfly milkweed. There it is.
Asclepias, a variety of tuberosa, speciosa, syriaca, a couple of others.
Yeah.
As far as the things that we've had to do, so there's the planning, the layout, the planting. What's the other stuff that we've kind of had to do over time?
With the thing that comes to mind is something we had to do more recently was I mentioned the goldenrod found its way into our yard and it kind of started taking over one of our native beds, to the point where it was crowding out some false indigo and some coneflower and some other stuff. And so having to kind of manage that, pull some of it out.
Manage is a good word. I mean, it's, yeah.
Because you don't want to pull all of it out. You want it to come, you want, some of it there. You want it to come back, but you don't want it to be an entire quarter of your yard.
Yeah.
Irrigation.
Yeah. Some watering. We've mostly just done hose watering since this iteration. Before we used drip tape for our straight beds and everything. Mulching, that was the thing that I was like, we have brought in a good bit of mulch across time. Maybe not as much as people might think, but we've used chip drop recently to get some chips for some walkway areas and stuff like that.
We got free mulch through the city of Lexington.
Shout out LFUCG for their free mulch days. That's
They're
pretty
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I overall, you would say the maintenance on what we have now is significantly lower than it was when we had vegetables.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because it's not annuals. Like, it's mostly either perennials, biennials, or reseeding annuals to some extent.
Yes.
I mean, and you could plant annuals in and whatever, but it's just a lot lower maintenance and a lot higher joy.
Yes.
I'm spending more time sitting out there and less time weeding.
Yes. And it's like I can walk through our paths and pull out some weeds once a day or every other day, and it takes 5 to 10 minutes instead of having to spend.
It's more like journaling
hours.
and less like writing a novel.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, to close, I would love to hear why do you even want to do this? Or did you and do you want to continue doing this? Why?
Starting and ending with the big questions. I mean, I think the beauty of it, I think it creates a welcoming place where I hope people want and enjoy spending time. I really like the idea of people walking by and seeing our front yard, and I don't know, maybe a particular flower or a butterfly or something just kind of brightens their day a little bit. Yeah, I don't.
So it's about the interface between plant and person.
Yes. Yeah. And
You're not just a straight up, it's pretty, that's cool, but you're not also a straight up, oh, it's for the butterflies and the bees and that's it.
Correct.
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Blend.
Yes.
Yeah. Would you say that it improves your quality of life?
Yes. Yes.
Just yes.
Just yes.
Extremely strong improv answer. Yes. Yeah, I think I do find that as we have made that transition, I actually voluntarily spend more time out there, even when it's hot and not overly comfortable. I spend a lot more time, under shade, but it's just sitting out watching stuff or walking around and enjoying it.
There's also just something to be, I'm going to do a terrible job trying to explain this, but looking out at a yard or even just like a small patch, 2x2 patch of flowers or a really cool tree or something just brings me so much more peace than sod. It's a lot more inspiring. It feels more, I don't know what the right word is, because I don't want to moralize it. I don't want to mythologize it like with the growing your own fruits and vegetables, but it just,
Something about that feels more like what you want to be doing and what you want to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I think that's a good place to leave it. Thank you for joining the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. When are we getting some horticulture merch?
Well, I don't know. That was not scripted, and we will be talking about that after I end this podcast. No, I don't know. We have thought about doing it. I think we're thinking about how to promote a little bit more, thinking about how to get us on for guest spots. I think having some merch could be a vibe. I'm not exactly sure how the working at UK versus not. I don't know how that plays in, but if you want merch, drop it in the comments, shoot us an email, or you can check us out and leave a comment on Instagram at Horticulture Podcast. You can email us. That's in the show notes. The email address is in the show notes. Without any further ado, I'll say thank you for joining us. And as we grow this podcast, we hope that you'll grow with us. Take care, and we'll see you next time.